Vladimir Putin. Well, he just said things that I've heard some of the best theologians say. He's attacking political correctness. He's saying we need to uphold morality. He's denounced Satanism, pedophilia. He's denounced the abolition of Christian holidays. All these things that we as Christians believe, he believed. You know what held me up on this? You know, my big hang-up? He was ex-KGB. And so as this old Bircher, I was in a big holdout. I'm still waiting for Galitzin's prediction to come true. And for, he's just going to reinstate communism. No, he's a genuine Christian.
This is Global Storyline with your host, Dean W. Arnold, where we examine events current and past and place them in the global storyline.
Okay, we're here with James Perloff, who is, I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit in terms of what he's done in the past and what books he's authored. But from my perspective, I'll just say that James is, I think, one of the top communicators right now in the country and the world. Just writes incredible articles that just nail the truth, solid documentation, a little bit of sense of humor mixed in with it, and he's just he's someone that we need during this time. So I'm so glad that he's with us and writing prolifically. And so I'll let him tell us a little bit about his background. But we're here today on globalstoryline.com interviewing him, and he and I having a conversation together because we both written an article this week that sort of dovetails with each other. The article he wrote is entitled "The Unthinkable Has Happened. Russia and America Have Traded Places." And that's a fantastic article that I would refer to you to read at jamesperloff.com, Perloff. And then I wrote an article this week that is somewhat similar at globalstoryline.com, which is Trump's Secretary of State, his pick, received Russia's Order of Friendship Award. In a multipolar world, is it bad to be a friend of Vlad? And so that article goes into great length about Rex Tillerson, who's been picked by Trump for Secretary of State, and him having received that award by Putin. That's all over the news that maybe this is such a terrible thing that he's a friend of Vladimir Putin. Of course, I take exception to that idea. And also, we talk about what it means to be a multipolar world as opposed to a unipolar world. We'll get into that. But you'll be hearing a lot about Rex Tillerson next week because his confirmation hearings in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee are Tuesday and Wednesday, I believe. So it'll be all over the news, and this dovetails well with James's article about the irony of Russia and America possibly switching places in terms of spiritual leadership in the world. And I'll let James introduce himself here in a second, but first let me just say I'm a little casual here in my lumberjack outfit for our session today. And that is because here where I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, we've had a blizzard. And so it's pretty overwhelming. And so we're all kind of dressed in our winter outfits. We have an unbelievable amount of about a half an inch of snow on the ground. And so the town here has pretty much gone crazy. So just wanted to explain to you why I have the informal look here. It looks like you're a little bit informal too there, Jim, and but you probably got a bigger excuse. You know, I think you live farther north.
Well, I usually dress pretty informally for these interviews, but I try not to wear T-shirts.
I'm not wearing a T-shirt.
We may be having a genuine blizzard here in New England. It's snowing pretty hard outside right now where I live in Massachusetts. And actually, the weather forecasting has gone way downhill. The weather forecaster today only dared say we'll have a few inches. No specification for the first time ever of how many inches. It's a combination of the Rothschild establishment now owning weather modeling, owning the Weather Channel, in owning the weather. And so you never know exactly what the weather's going to do or whether the forecast is right or not. But
well, we won't go there today.
Yeah, no, we won't get into that. But I do have an article on the Rothschilds and the weather, which people can read in my. There's a whole thing called weather derivatives, where people can make there's billions of dollars traded on the weather. And of course, when you control the weather and the weather forecast, you've got that market locked up. But that's for another time.
Yeah, and they've been talking about that since the 40s and 50s. It's pretty much reality. But anyway. Go ahead and just quickly tell us about yourself, what you've written, your background, and then you can kind of start moving into this article, because I think this article really does relate to your background.
Well, it does, and I started out my journalism career writing my first article in 1985 for the New American Magazine, continued to write for them for 27 years. And the New American was the journal of the John Birch Society, and a very respectable journal, and one of those few journals that looked at the issues that all media looks at today. It talked about the Federal Reserve, the Council on Foreign Relations, it opposed globalism, it supported the U.S. Constitution, and it was a majorly anti-communist. And I wrote a bestseller for them called The Shadows of Power, which is a study of the history of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the organization that the establishment uses to control American foreign policy and supply cabinet-level personnel, and it pursues a goal of world government. And then in the 90s, I became a Christian in 1983, and I got very interested in the creation evolution debate because after becoming a Christian, I still had held over questions about how man came about, and I found that Darwin's Theory of Evolution with the House of Cards. I wrote 2 books on that, did a lot of radio shows and PowerPoints. Then after 9/11 came along, I realized that the geopolitical sphere was more urgent than what I was doing in the creation evolution arena, even though I continued to work in that. And my latest book is called Truth is a Lonely Warrior, which is a real update of the Shadows of Power. It is a A to Z primer on the New World Order. It covers not only the CFR in this case, but the Federal Reserve, media control, false flags. That's how I open it up with false flags that have led us into wars. And I talk about Freemasonry, full chapter on 9/11, full chapter on the Vietnam War. There was a chapter on weather control, a chapter on vaccines, which is all part of the population control agenda, a chapter on Zionism. And so I try to give people something they can give to a skeptic, because I've said this many times before, but if you just give people 9/11, it's like giving people one piece of a jigsaw puzzle. You look at one piece of a jigsaw puzzle, it doesn't make sense. But if you see the full puzzle and all the pieces together, now that piece does make sense. Because if you just show them 9/11, they're going to say, well, our own government would never do that to us. And if they did, they'd tell us about it on network TV news. But so you have to tell them who controls network news and who controls the government. And you have to give them that full picture before they can begin to understand it. So
let me stop you there for a second.
Yeah.
I own the book. Great book. Highly recommended. I gave one of your books to a friend for Christmas. So I'm a believer in it. And I just wanted to mention that I don't know if you felt this, but I think in the last couple of years, I think the whole concept of false flags and the possibility that something could be a false flag has actually started to emerge as and I don't know if you'd say acceptable, but a topic that is actually willing to be somewhat entertained in certain sections of discussion, which to me is a huge accomplishment in terms
Yes.
of a truth getting out there. And so I'm encouraged by that. I mean, we have a long way to go, but someone who might be 25, 30 years old and doesn't really have the breadth of insight that you and I would have, having been around when all you had was 3 channels and that sort of thing. It's
Right.
we have come a long way. And then, with what President Trump is doing in terms of, he'll tweet and say he doesn't necessarily believe the CIA. These are pretty extraordinary developments just in the last year or so. And so I'm pretty encouraged, and I think there's a long way to go. But I think the work that people like you have done for 30, 40 years, and others, who, the lonely warriors back then, you're still lonely, but you're not quite as lonely, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You're right. I was very encouraged, during the debates, Trump started to use the phrase mainstream media, and that's the first time I ever heard a major candidate acknowledge there was such a thing as the mainstream media as differentiated from alternative media. In this last election, even though many of us still entertain doubts about Trump for a number of reasons, it was a victory for those of us who were alt media was pretty much aligned against Hillary Clinton. We wanted to see an end of the Clinton-Bush era. They wanted a Jeb Bush-Hillary Clinton presidency. That's how it started out. They didn't get it. They had to settle for second or third best. And this was a big victory, a David over Goliath. And people are starting to turn off CNN. In fact, there was recently, a couple of weeks ago, CNN's ratings dropped so low they were trailing Cartoon Network and viewership. And so, yeah, hats off to alternative media. It is making great strides.
One more thing, I don't think we've quite really digested just how crazy it's become, but Fox News was being pretty unfair, and Trump, he just said, well, okay, then the next debate, I'm not even going to come. I'm the one who brings all your ratings to the debate, so I just won't come to your debate. So a presidential candidate, now a president, who even thinks that way is just, we are definitely in a huge sea change, an absolute revolution. Things have been turned upside down in terms of how information gets distributed to the masses. Mm-hmm. And it's a great time to be alive, really, for people like us. And but I would say we saw the same thing early on when Trump would tweet things like the New York Times is corrupt. CNN, what a fraud. We didn't get a transition because every single presidential candidate up until Trump just kind of bowed to the media, supplicated to the major media. They might disagree with them cordially, but they would never, seriously take them on. We went from that to Trump, who just out and out just tweets them and calls them frauds and calls them corrupt and calls them a joke. And not only doesn't take a hit for it, but he becomes the president. So couple that with him telling Fox, I'm not going to come to your debate, and all the things that are going on. The most powerful person in the country right now, arguably other than Trump, is his chief strategist, Steve Bannon, who is the owner, or somehow one of the owners of Breitbart Media, alternative media. So we really have had the revolution. Things have turned upside down, and I'm pretty excited about it. But anyway, I interrupted you. You told us a little bit about your background. Go ahead and tell us about this recent article you wrote and begin to kind of go through that.
Okay. My recent post, again titled "The Unthinkable Has Finally Happened, Russia and America Have Traded Places." Going back to my background, writing for the John Birch Society's magazine, The New American, very good magazine. In the 80s, we saw America as the leader of the free world, and that was rightly so. We had our Bill of Rights, we had a prospering middle class, and on the other side, you had the communists, you had the Iron Curtain, you had the Soviet Union headquartered in Moscow, which had been birthed with the Bolshevik Revolution. They'd killed millions of people, and I cited the figure given by the Black Book of Communism in my article, which is from Harvard University Press, which is very liberal. They put the number of deaths by the communists at 100 million, but other sources have put it much higher than that. And of course, they built the Berlin Wall, they built the gulags. They were a police state where you'd report on your neighbor. It was Orwellian. The state controlled the media. There's no freedom of speech or freedom of the press. They created the Holodomor, which killed millions in the Ukraine, and they crushed the 1956 Hungarian revolt. So they were the bad guys, and we were the good guys, and that's how we saw it, and that was correct. Now, in 1985, there was a phenomenon that took place, which was that Mikhail Gorbachev came to power, and all of a sudden you had this glasnost and liberalization in Russia. And I have to tell you that our reaction to that, the magazine, was one of great skepticism because they're used to Soviet tricks, and we figured this is just a deception to get the West to disarm. And we had very good reason. We had support from that from the world's number one, the top KGB defector, Anatoly Golitsyn. He'd written this book, New Lies for Old, 1984, the year before Gorbachev came to power. And Golitsyn's book was ignored by the mainstream media, although you actually can see his escape from Russia depicted in the opening scenes of Alfred Hitchcock's 1969 movie Topaz, which is kind of interesting. It was the inspiration for the beginning of that movie. But this book, he said, they're going to liberalize in Russia, but they're not going to be sincere. He said the Russian strategy is that if they talk softly and look charming, that will disarm. That's their strategy. And so you can see a very liberal leader. He described a guy who was just like Gorbachev. He said you can see the Berlin Wall come down. And he made over 300 predictions, and 94% of them came true. And so I put a lot of stock in Golitsyn, and he predicted that in the end that communism was going to reappear. And he said it would reappear in the end after the West had been deceived into disarming. It's going to reappear as in its worst forms from the Leninist, Stalinist days. He said, so for a long time I was waiting for that. I was waiting for the day that Russia was going to reemerge as a communist state. And there are a couple of factors that need to be mentioned regarding this. One is that the Mikhail Gorbachev glasnost transition had an angle to it that I've only come to discover in recent years. I've written a post on it. But when the Soviet Union liberalized, what should have happened in America, what should have happened is that we should have started taking down the military-industrial establishment. I mean, the Cold War and all that military buildup was all about the threat of communism. So with the threat of communism gone, there was no need for this huge military establishment. But what happened was, as soon as Gorbachev came to power, and I believe this is the underworkings of the deep state New World Order, as soon as he came to power and the communists ceased to be the major threat they'd been for all those decades, all of a sudden the war on terror began. Gorbachev came to power in 1985, and in 1986, Reagan bombed Libya, the first act of the war on terror. And that was in response to actually a deception by the Mossad, who set up a transmitter in Libya, which deceived the United States into believing that Libya was responsible for a bombing in Germany at the La Belle discotheque. It was all a Mossad operation. And that's in Viktor Ostrovsky's book, The Other Side of Deception. He's a former Mossad officer, so that information is from the inside of Mossad. But there also were movies coming out in the mid-'80s, like Invasion USA with Chuck Norris, and, of course, Back to the Future. And all of a sudden, the Muslims were the bad guys, not the communists. And then in 1991, when the Soviet Union broke up, we had our first land war in the Middle East against Saddam Hussein in 1991. And what happened was, as the communist threat went away, we simply transitioned over to a Muslim threat. And what we're really doing there, with all these Arab Spring wars, the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, destabilizing Egypt, it's all about creating greater Israel. That's really another subject that takes us away from what's happening in Russia right now. But that was a big part of Mikhail Gorbachev transition. But of course, as you know, they're looking for this new world order. And I think that when Russia was going down the drain under Yeltsin, and they had these Jewish Rothschild oligarchs, 7 men who owned half the wealth in Russia, and people in Russia were starving, they thought that Russia was going to be absorbed into overthrowing this one world government. You know, that's what Norman Dodd talked about. I'm sure you've seen this famous interview with Norman Dodd, the congressional investigating foundations, who talked to Rowan Gaither, the head of the Ford Foundation, who said that their goal was to merge the United States with the Soviet Union. And I figured that that's where we're going to go. We're going to see the rebirth of communism as we turn towards socialism here in America. But instead, something very different happened in Russia. Putin came to power, and all of a sudden he got rid of those oligarchs. And all of a sudden Russia began to rejuvenate. And I think that the first tip-off that something really wonderful was happening in Russia came when I started watching some of Brother Nathaniel's videos. Now, like you, he's an Orthodox, a Russian Orthodox believer. And he started talking about
Eastern Orthodox is really the phrase that I would use. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well,
yeah,
they all work, but that Eastern encompasses more than Russia. There's Orthodox churches all over the world.
Ethnicities within it. But in Russia, of course, it's Russian Orthodox. And I started to watch Putin and his testimonies about his faith. And I started to realize that I already been am very impressed by his action in Syria, which put a halt to this Middle East madness that's been going on ever since 9/11, with one war after another based on a false pretext. I mean, we went into Afghanistan on the pretext that they were shielding Osama bin Laden, the alleged perpetrator of 9/11. Now we know that, well, this won't be convincing to everyone, but it's really the Zionists who were behind 9/11. And I certainly have articles on that. My next to last article was about Netanyahu and the Israeli connections to 9/11. And of course, we've been fighting these wars on behalf of Israel. But I was very impressed by his common sense. And it's not a rebirth of communism that's taking place. It's a rebirth of Christianity, with over 26,000 new churches open, 800 monasteries. I've got several short video clips embedded in the article. There's one of him just this past November raising a statue of Vladimir the Great with Patriarch Kirill.
And just to clarify, Vladimir the Great is not Vladimir Lenin of the Russian Revolution. It's 1,000 years ago. Vladimir the Great, the first Christian king of Russia, who brought Christianity to Russia in the late 900s.
Mm-hmm. Now, you'll find these embedded clips, and the interview you and I are doing is not quite technically sophisticated, so we can do video plays. But before I turn this back, I want to read a quote that I do have. He says it live. You'll see Putin saying this live. But I want to. I printed out. I took screenshots of the subtitles of what Putin was saying.
Go ahead and show them up there. It works a lot better than you think.
Well, I'm not. I know quite how to do that on a Skype interview.
I'm just saying, if you got a picture, hold it up.
Oh, well, this is just this is not a Putin. It's just of the subtitles, which people won't be able to see, but I can see. So I'm just going to read. Here's what Putin said for his last Christmas message. Quote: "We see that many Euro-Atlantic states have taken the way where they deny or reject their own roots, including their Christian roots, which forms the basis of Western civilization. In these countries, the moral basis and any traditional identity are being denied. National, religious, cultural, and even gender identities are being denied or relativized. There, politics treats a family with many children as equal to a homosexual partnership. Faith in God is equal to faith in Satan. The excesses and exaggerations of political correctness in these countries indeed leads to serious consideration for the legitimization of parties that promote the propaganda of pedophilia. The people in many European states are actually ashamed of their religious affiliations, indeed frightened to speak about them. Christian holidays and celebrations are abolished or neutrally renamed, as if one were ashamed of those Christian holidays. With this method, one hides away the deeper moral value of these celebrations. And these countries try to force this model onto other countries globally. I'm deeply convinced that this is a direct way to the degradation and primitivization of culture. This leads to deeper demographic and moral crises in the West. What can be better evidence for the moral crisis of a human society than the loss of its reproductive function?" And today,
now that's a quote from Billy. That's Billy Graham. Is that you? Is that you, or is that Billy Graham? Or no? That's not the Pope, is it? That's too moderate for the Pope.
This is Vladimir Putin.
Oh, it's Vladimir Putin. Gotcha.
This is what I wish we'd hear Western diplomats saying. Okay, continuing this quote. It says, "And today nearly all quote-unquote developed Western countries cannot survive reproductively, not even with the help of migrants. Without the moral values that are rooted in Christianity and other world religions, without rules and moral values which have formed and been developed over millennia, people will inevitably lose their human dignity and become brutes. And we think, meaning the Russians, it is right and natural to defend and preserve these moral Christian values. One has to respect the right of every minority to self-determination, but at the same time, there cannot and must not be any doubt about the rights of the majority. At the same time as this process at a national level in the West, we observe on an international level the attempts to create a unipolar, unified model of the world to relativize and remove institutions of international right and national sovereignty. And this says in parentheses, Putin is speaking about U.S. imperium. In such a unipolar, unified world, there is no place for sovereign states. Such a world merely needs vassals. From a historical perspective, such a unipolar world would mean the surrender of one's own identity and of God-created diversity, unquote. Vladimir Putin. Well, he just here said things that I've heard some of the best theologians say. He's attacking political correctness. He's saying we need to uphold morality. He's denounced Satanism, pedophilia. He's denounced the abolition of Christian holidays.
Same-sex marriage.
We need to respect traditional marriage. All these things that we as Christians believe, he believes. And if you think he's a phony, I just invite people to go there, and you'll see him talk about his background. Yeah, we know what held me up on this. My big hang-up was he was ex-KGB. He was in the KGB from 1975 to 1991. And so as this old Bircher, I was in a big holdout. I'm still waiting for Galitzin's prediction to come true and for, he's just going to reinstate communism. No, he is a genuine Christian. And in fact...
Well, I'm going to stop you. I want to go back and forth a little bit.
I've been talking for a while, so I don't want so much, and people go to sleep if I keep talking. So
no, that's all right. No, it's okay. Well, let me, I got a lot of questions and a lot of things to piggyback on, but for me to talk a little bit about my article, I'll jump on the last part of the Putin quote, which is talking about a multipolar world. And so the article that I've written this week that's preparing for the Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, confirmation hearings next week, basically says, is it okay to be a friend of Vlad? He won this award, the Order of Friendship Award with Russia. And I got a little humorous there at the beginning because I looked up who else has won this award. There's been 50 recipients, and the award winners include the Prime Minister of Canada, the head of the European Jewish Federation, a figure skater, a Polish film director, LeBron James's basketball coach. I mean, we're not talking about evil villains here. We're just talking about people who've done good things that Russia appreciated. They appreciated Rex Tillerson as the head of Exxon because they've worked at some very large deals to increase trade between the U.S. and Russia on the most important commodity in the world. But anyway, I start the article that way, but I really asked the question, is it bad to be a friend of Vlad? And, of course, the answer to the rhetorical question is no, of course not. And I asked the question in the title, is it in a multipolar world, is it bad to be a friend of Vlad? And the answer is no, definitely not. But let's talk about multipolar world. And these large words might be intimidating to somebody. They're pretty obvious. Unipolar world, one empire, one country dominating everything. Multipolar world, several. Now, from 1920 or so till 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we were a bipolar world, bipolarity. And Russia and the Soviet Union basically kept each other at bay. Mutually assured destruction was the kind of the formula that kept the nuclear war from breaking out. Soviet Union collapsed. 1991 is usually the date given for that. And as you said, America had a chance to bring peace. Disarm and quit being so militaristic. They blew it, and the neocons jumped into the vacuum and started all their invasions of the Middle Eastern countries and doing everything they could to pepper the borders of Russia to try to bring Russia down completely. Well, that backfired on America. But where we're moving to now, and there's some philosophical stuff I talk about in my article in terms of why unipolarity doesn't work just in the abstract. You always need to have the offsetting, balancing powers. But with the rise of China, in the since about 2000, and the reemergence of Russia since about 2000, we have seen what is an obvious next step for world geopolitics, which is a tripolar or a multipolar 1, 2, 3 superpowers offsetting each other and providing a balance of power for us to have peace in the world. Because what do we already know as Americans? If you study American history, the Founding Fathers always taught us that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so the Founding Fathers set up 3 branches of government. They set up state government versus federal government. They had all these checks and balances and all these things in order to not have power concentrated in any particular place too largely, because of their, it was basically a Christian philosophical belief that human nature can't be trusted with power. And so because of sin and the Christian views of those sorts of things, we've got to set things up in a certain way. And that's where we are in the world as well. Obviously, in the world, there's got to be some balances of power, or absolute power will corrupt absolutely, which is what happened during the 90s and where the neocons tried to go. Thankfully, it looks like they're failing. But the world is inevitably moving right now towards a multipolar world. China, Russia, and the United States. Now, if the empire, whenever an empire is declining into another situation, it can be very violent, it can be very bloody, depending on how kind of tenaciously that empire holds on. With someone at Trump at the helm, we're really in a better situation. We got more potential to see that happen in a more peaceful manner. And with him appointing someone like Tillerson as his Secretary of State, who's interested in trade. He wants to put together oil deals so that we all can live a better lifestyle and not have to pay so much for oil. He's not interested in creating a boogeyman threat so that the military-industrial complex can go to Congress and ask for another $1 trillion so everybody can have their cushy $200,000 a year jobs in D.C. So Tillerson is the right man at the right time. Trump is the right president at the right time to move us more peacefully with less bloodshed into the obvious place where we have the best chance of peace in our world, general peace. I'm not talking about utopian, weird, sin is going to leave the world or anything, but just a general peace because we've got a balance of power. And so I'm very excited about that. Putin talks about that at the end of the speech you just mentioned. So I wanted to point that out. Now let's go back to some of the stuff you said. My first question is, what happened to Golitsyn? Who is? Let me just remind the listeners here. Golitsyn is the Soviet spy who defected. Was he a spy?
Defected, and he was probably regarded as the most significant defector of all time. I believe he's the highest-ranking KGB defector. Very intelligent man. And his defection did result in at least 200 Soviet engines being uncovered. So he was the real deal.
Anyway, so he wrote that article. He wrote that book that you held up. He predicted many of the things that happened, which you were impressed with. But he also predicted that eventually communism would reemerge, which you as a Bircher and others would be very attuned to believing that the Soviets were capable of such tricks. But it didn't happen. And so you are now where you are, but my question is, what happened to Golitsyn?
That's a great question. He would be very old at this point. He would probably be, I imagine he must have passed away. I haven't actually checked that, but he'd be about 100 years old now. So if he was alive, he wouldn't be in a position to comment on Putin's Russia one way or the other.
It'd be interesting to find out if there's anything on the record before he passed away on what he felt.
Oh, well, I would love to do that. I was very impressed by that picture in your article, by the way, of Solzhenitsyn beaming at Putin. That was very impressive to see.
Another point I wanted to make here, and that's the question that a lot of people ask when they hear about Putin's Christian faith. He goes to church a lot. He goes to confession, rebuilding churches. He's seen a lot with the patriarchs, and a lot of people just say, well, it's all for show. He's a politician. Politicians do that. I don't really believe that he's for real. And my counterpoint to that is very interesting, which is if Putin is only doing it for political reasons, what does that say about the body politic in Russia? What does that say about the populace in Russia? What does that say about the people in Russia? What it says is that they are demanding a leader who is talking about Christian things.
Mm-hmm.
So for the person who's doubtful or who doesn't want to believe that there's a Christian movement going on in Russia, you really can't get away from it because the worst case scenario is that their leader, Vladimir Putin, is doing all sorts of Christian, moral, and traditionalist things to appease a very vehement Christian populace. That's the worst case scenario. And the best case scenario is that he is for real, that he's a genuine Christian.
Well, I think he's for real, and you know them by their fruits, right? And so we see that gay parades are illegal in Russia, whereas our president lights up the White House with rainbow colors to celebrate the legalization of gay marriage. I mean, that's why we say we're trading places. There's so much Christianity in public schools in Russia now that some people complain about it who are very liberal. He's done a lot of great things. They've closed the gambling casinos in Russia, whereas, gambling is proliferating. It's state endorsed gambling here in America. We mentioned the 26,000 new churches. They don't allow shows like The Simpsons and South Park to corrupt their youth. Whereas our TV, we even have a show called Lucifer. Lucifer's got his own TV show in America. And you've got, another example of my article, but there's countless examples. I don't watch TV these days, but Madonna dressing up as Baphomet for the Super Bowl halftime show. I mean, it's in-your-face Satanism on our television, and there they've got it's Christian content.
Let me ask you a question, Jim. This isn't in your notes or in your article, so it'll be kind of fun to kind of ad lib here a little bit and kind of see what you say. But I just like to get into the psychology of it, because the more I get into all this, the more I'm sort of fascinated with the psychology of it. And when I mean the psychology of it, I mean the difficult, painstaking process of changing in a huge tectonic shift your views of who are the good guys and who are the bad guys and how these things are developing. That's a very difficult thing to do for everybody, for all of us. So you went through a process. I don't know if it's been in the last year, the last 2 years, last 5 years, last 10 years, but you had to slowly, you heard this information about a reemergence of Christianity in Russia. You didn't believe it. You thought it was Soviet propaganda. Things started to emerge a little bit more. You saw some more things. You heard some things about Putin. You figured out he was a faker. Then you heard more. You got convinced. You had to look at your own country and its own background and what it was doing, either in the recent future or maybe even in the far past. But anyway, if you can, just tell me a little bit about that psychological process and while you're talking about it. What kind of things, right brain or left brain, helped tip the balance? Because we're in an informational war now to try to get lots of other people to make that tectonic shift.
Well, what tipped the balance, I think, was this won't register for some people, but watching Putin make these statements, and my observation is it's from the heart. And it's not just one speech, it's many things he said over time. And again, he's not a Johnny-come-lately. And there was a quote I was about to give before. It was from this, I probably will butcher his name, but Father Tikhon Shevkunov, a Russian Orthodox monk, said in 2001, so we're talking 15 years ago, he said, quote, "Putin really is an Orthodox Christian, and not just nominally, but a person who makes confession, takes communion, and understands his responsibility before God for the high service entrusted to him and for his immortal soul," unquote. Another thing that impressed me was one of Brother Nathaniel's videos on how Putin celebrates Christmas. And he commented here, he doesn't go to a big cathedral in Moscow. He goes to a small village, stands with the children, and crosses himself and bows humbly before God. And he doesn't have to do that. Is he putting on a show for 15 years now? And to trick who? I mean, the Russian people are behind him. His popularity rating is soaring in Russia. He's doing good things for he watch out for his country's interests, whereas our country has been dominated for decades by members of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there and make a comment.
My book Shadows of Power is about.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
The globalist guys.
Well, let me comment on that. And let me first just say that one of the things I like to do on a regular basis, or have for the last 3 or 4 years since the Syria thing broke out, is every now and then I like to post a picture of Assad, particularly Assad and his wife together, because Assad is he's like a cool looking dude. He looks like some dude who's in British Parliament, or going out on the town after British. He looks better than guys in British Parliament. He's a slick looking guy. He could be in a James Bond movie kind of guy. He's a good looking guy who wears a suit, and clean shaven, and he's not, he's not wearing a turban. He doesn't have a big long beard. He's not taking a rifle, and he's a sharp looking guy. And his wife is smoking hot. She's British. She's smoking hot. She's got long hair. She's beautiful. She was I think she went to Harvard, and she was headed to be an investment banker at Goldman Sachs when she married Assad. And she's great looking, and she wears the most fashionable dresses from Madison Avenue that you can find, and so you see these pictures of these two, and it provides such a cognitive dissonance for people. So I have fun doing that on a regular basis. Most recently, I found a very obscure video clip of Mrs. Assad saying some things. It was about 30 minutes long, so it wasn't very accessible, and I was able to download it and turn it into about a 2-minute, very accessible video for people to view, and it completely just changes your view of things. Well, here's what's interesting: is you don't find those images anywhere. It's just they're just verboten. They are persona non grata. They are absolutely just off the radar. And why would this be? Well, it would be because images are extremely powerful. And so what I am fascinated by what you shared there in your unscripted testimony is that it was really imagery that played a major role in you changing your views. And it's not the only view. It's not the only thing. Yeah, obviously there has to be documentation, there has to be facts, and there has to be a lot of kind of stuff. But imagery played a very, very, very serious role. So that's something to note.
Yeah, so as long as we live in an era of Photoshop, so we have to be careful about images these days. But yes, seeing him actually in person, the way he behaved, that was impressive to me.
The image and the imagery you're talking about, the Christian imagery of Putin being in churches and all kind of stuff. You can't find that
and humbling himself before God.
You can't find that in major media.
Do you ever see a Western politician do that in church?
But those images are nowhere to be found in Western media.
Not in the mainstream.
Too powerful.
Right. And speaking of Assad's wife, by the way, at the time that Obama wanted to launch his first airstrike, CNN did a hit piece on her. I don't remember the details, but I said this is a clear-cut indication that the Assads are good people, because when CNN does a hit piece, and I recall when in the 80s, when they went after Ferdinand Marcos' wife because she had 2,000 pairs of shoes or something like that, what they didn't mention was that as First Lady of the Philippines, all shoe companies in the Philippines automatically gave the first shoe that came out of a new line off the factory line to the First Lady. It was just a tradition. It wasn't because she was greedy and spending the people's money on it. Okay, it was just. And another one was Princess Farah, the wife.
What was behind? Why were they attacking Marcos?
Regime change, destabilizing the Philippines. But before that, there was Princess Farah, the Shah's wife, and they attacked her for dancing while people died. And this goes back to the fact that there was an arranged murder in it was the Rex Theater in Abadan, Iran, where people were trapped in a fire. That was an arranged event. It was timed on the same day that the Shah was celebrating his mother's birthday. So they will just say, look, the Shah's wife danced while people were dying. That was part of the takedown of the Shah when they were, after he announced that he was going to, that goes back to Henry Kissinger and wanting to destroy the Shah when he said he was going to nationalize the oil industry and take it away from the Western powers. So, but going after the first lady of a country, that's by CNN, that's a dead tip off. That these are good people,
right?
When the MSM is going after
now, one thing I want to make sure we discuss during this talk, the people who are going to be listening to us, they may be willing to agree with some of the things we're saying, but at some point they're probably going to say, "Now hold on a minute, Vladimir Putin is not a saint, and he's not the world's greatest man in the world," and I think it's important, at least from my perspective, I can't speak for you, but I think it's important that we do admit the guy's running a country, okay? He's running a superpower, and anybody who rises to the top, compromises have to be made. There has to be some realpolitik, because I think that's the French phrase. But I'm not saying that he's a saint. I'm sure if he does go to confession, he probably has some serious things to confess, whatever. I think what we're doing here in this session is we're doing what Rush Limbaugh talks about when he jokes. He says, "I am equal time." In other words, since all you hear anywhere and everywhere is that Vladimir Putin is a thug and a terrible, horrible villain, we're trying to take a few minutes on a podcast to try to, counterbalance that and kind of say, well, no, there's this, 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 and this, and you need to think about this, this, and this, and this. And so by the nature of the way the contest is right now, those of you who are listening to us just understand that you're going to hear mostly good stuff right now in this podcast, but yes, there is a realization that Vladimir Putin's a sinner. Russia is a country full of sinners, and thank God they're right now they're broken because of their problems in the past, and they're turning to Christ and they're trying to work through things. It doesn't mean they don't have problems. It doesn't mean that we don't have things we can point on their side. It doesn't mean that Putin doesn't have things that might be exposed, whatever. But compared to the propaganda vision that we've all been fed and that we're all getting, it's very, very, very different. And so we're trying to shed some light on that. So I just want to make that clarification. Make that caveat.
Kevin, well, I think the guy's a saint for myself.
Well, he may be. I'm not going to leave that out.
But anyway, to get back to some of that propaganda, of course, we should probably touch on the fact this whole Russian hacking claim is the latest demonization of Putin. And as you know, you were talking about the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They asked the CIA, give us the evidence. They were concerned if he hacked the election, what's the evidence? And the CIA couldn't give it. It's nothing but a soundbite. If you've noticed, after Hillary lost the election, and Hillary was the candidate of choice. I mean, you had Lady Rothschild coming on Yahoo Financial to say how great she'd be for business, and even George H.W. Bush said he was going to vote for her. They pulled out all the stops to get Hillary elected, and they still didn't do it. But after the election, you still had them trying. You had the George Soros-funded riots. You had the Jill Stein recount, only in states that Trump won. And then you had the death threats against electors. And then you had Obama, who in October had said the election couldn't be rigged. Now he says it was rigged. It was hacked by Putin and the Russians. But no evidence whatsoever, not one shred of evidence has been produced to confirm that. And again, the demonization of Putin, just like the demonization of Assad, is it's not proof, but it's a further hint. When you see the mainstream media going after somebody, it's about time to say, well, we know what the mainstream media stands for. If they go against somebody, it usually means they're a good guy. If they're building somebody up, it usually means they're a bad guy. So, but the whole hacking thing, if Putin was actually a aggressor, like they say he is, he was an international aggressor because of the Crimea, if he was an international aggressor, he'd want Hillary in there. You know why? Because Hillary has no respect for the military. They're not going to take orders from her. And so if he was really an international aggressor, he should have hacked it in favor of Hillary, not Donald Trump. It doesn't even make sense.
Since you're on the topic, let me let me spend a couple minutes talking about the accusations against Putin that always come up, that are a stumbling block for a lot of people to believe that he may be a decent leader. And I deal with these in a little bit of detail in my article. Let's talk the one you brought up first, which is he is aggressor. Putin aggression, Putin aggression, Putin aggression, Putin aggression, Putin aggression. Hack the emails, hack the emails, hack the election, hack the election. You know how it goes. And repeat a lie long enough and people will believe it. So Putin aggression. Well, first of all, if you look at a map of Russia, it's about half the size right now of its footprint when it was the Soviet Union. Russia is shrinking. It is not expanding. Okay, number one. Number two, the U.S. made an agreement with Russia in 1991 when they brokered the deal to bring East and West Germany together. The Bush 1 administration promised that NATO, the alliance of Western states that was basically in existence to really overthrow Russia, but they made a deal with Russia that if Russia would agree to East and West Germany reuniting, that NATO would not move any farther east than Germany. Well, since that agreement, since that promise by the U.S., 12 countries have been added to NATO east of Germany, several of them on Russia's border. Okay, so we broke the promise, and then you've had some skirmishes. Okay, well, in Georgia, south of Russia, this was in 2008, one of the earlier incidences, there was an uprising. Russia had to go in there, and there was a fight, and they talked about Putin aggression. Well, it all came out, and all the facts are on the ground, and it's been proven that it was Georgia, with the help of Mossad and CIA, that attacked Russia, attacked Abkhazia, and the other small country I forgot. And they were just responding in defense. Okay, let's talk about Ukraine. There was the constant drumbeat that Putin is going to invade Ukraine. He never invaded Ukraine. They talk about Crimea. Well, he took over Crimea. He invaded Crimea. Well, no, he didn't. Okay, let's talk about Crimea. Crimea is Russia's largest naval base. Think about that. The largest naval base of the first or second largest superpower on Earth. Okay? It's been a part of Russia for 1,000 years. It's where Russia's first Christian king, Vladimir, was baptized. It's all a part of Russia. In 1954, Nikita Khrushchev, just as a kind of a little token gesture, on paper, made Crimea a part of the Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet Union. It's like one of our states. And so only in a very technical sense has Crimea, for a short time, been a part of Ukraine, so to speak. And so when the Soviet Union collapsed and everything kind of turned into chaos, well, sure, the Crimea was maybe technically part of Ukraine, but it's Russia's largest naval base. And so there was never any sense that anything would ever change. Well, now what happens in the Ukraine a couple of years ago is that Victoria Nuland, who has said on the record, there's a YouTube video where she says they spent $5 billion in attempts to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine. It was a CIA coup. It was not democracy. It was overtaking a democratically elected government. $5 billion spent by the U.S. to make this happen. Well, when a country goes from being democratic to being authoritarian, thanks to the U.S., and the first or second largest superpower in the world has their largest naval base being threatened, obviously they're going to do something about it. But there's more. It's not just that. By treaty, Russia, even after 1991, there was a 1997 treaty, I think, that confirmed this, but Russia was allowed to have 25,000 soldiers in Crimea as part of their naval base operations and all that sort of thing. Okay? So what happens? The Ukraine blows up. It's no longer democratic. Nobody knows who's in charge or what's in charge, right? The people in Crimea don't like it, and so they have an election and they vote 95% to 5% that they want to be annexed by Russia. They want to join Russia. Well, everybody thought that was a great idea when Kosovo voted to do that. The United Nations and all the Democratic people, they all thought, oh, that's so wonderful. Now we've got democracy. The Kosovo people have asked to withdraw and become their own nation. Wouldn't that be great? We all support that. Well, when the people of Crimea wanted to do that, suddenly it's a terrible thing and it's wrong and well, that's what they did. And there's more. And that is that when Putin said, okay, you want to be part of Russia? That's fine. He didn't go invade Russia, Crimea with a bunch of soldiers. There was already 25,000 Russian soldiers in Crimea. Mm. They just kind of woke up the next day and said, okay, we're part of Russia now. So Putin did not invade Ukraine. I can't go into all the details here, but if you look into all the supposed allegations of Putin aggression, and you turn over the rock, it all looks the same. They're invalid, and they really are all actually, it's the pot calling the kettle black. It's worse than that, because Russia's not even the kettle or the pot. But Western forces go in and cause a disturbance, and they cause a military problem on Russia's border. Russia responds, and then Putin gets called an aggressor. So it's terrible. It's lies. It's evil. So Putin's an aggressor. Okay, we got rid of that. Putin's KGB. Well, George H.W. Bush was the head of the CIA. Does that make him necessarily? There might be other reasons you might think he's evil, but just on its face, for people dealing with these propaganda wars, George H.W. Bush ran the CIA. So Putin was part of the KGB. So what? Not only that, but Russia has changed from being an atheistic Soviet Union to being a Christian-based Russia. So that really doesn't apply. He's KGB. So what? What are some other things you hear about Putin? I don't have them at the tip of my tongue right now, so I can't.
Let's see.
The spy, polonium poisoning, Alexander Litvinenko, and if you guys remember the imagery, the power of imagery, it's really all about images. And so there's the bald-headed guy in the hospital bed who said that he was poisoned by Vladimir Putin. And that's all you saw all over the media constantly. And it came back up again about a year ago because Parliament finally had their big investigation and inquiry into this matter as to what really happened, to prove beyond all doubt, with overwhelming amounts of evidence, that Vladimir Putin is a murderer and killed Alexander Litvinenko. Well, when the investigation and the final report came out, there was no evidence anywhere on the record of Putin or Russia being involved in Litvinenko's death. There was only speculation, and there was a bunch of anonymous witnesses in secret closed hearings who gave the evidence. Okay? Same old. Weapons of mass destruction, Trust us, just believe us. We've got all this kind of stuff. So it's never been proven. Antiwar.com has suggested, based on a report by London's Independent, the Independent, that just before he contracted the poisoning, Litvinenko was smuggling polonium from one country to another, and they're suggesting that he poisoned himself as he was involved in smuggling nuclear materials on the black market. So that's another one. Sense. Poisoning the spy. And we could bring up others. Was there one you were going to bring up?
Well, I think you've covered the main ones about as far as Putin goes. I don't know if there's been, let's see, that he's a dictator. You already mentioned the Crimea. I don't think it's clear that he's not an aggressor. If he's an international aggressor, it has forces here in the West, he had forces in the Western Hemisphere, that'd be a different story. We've got our forces around his borders, not the other way around. And it should be clear to people, but unfortunately, sometimes we get so caught up in, long-standing ideas. One for me was the fact that he was KGB and Golitsyn was KGB, and Golitsyn had made some very accurate predictions. So I was betting on that, but I think what happened was in his own context of time, Golitsyn was making a correct prediction, but something happened that nobody expected, which was a movement of God within Russia. Nobody was expecting that to happen, and that upset the plans of the New World Order.
Oh, here's another one. George Stephanopoulos confronted Trump in an interview, but Trump was also confronted in a debate. It was a great Trump moment, where the very typically unbiased debate moderator.
Very unbiased, yes.
Yes, they said to Trump, well, why are you saying that you want to get along with Putin? He's a murderer. He killed journalists. Everybody knows he killed journalists. And Trump said, well, I'm not aware of that. He says that would be terrible if he did, but I'm not aware of that. Can you prove that? Who are you talking about? Well, and during the debate, the moderators couldn't come up with anything, and they looked stupid. Trump called their bluff, who's about the only person in the world at that level who has the stones to do such a thing. But then in another interview on TV, George Stephanopoulos asked him the same thing, and Trump responded and said, can you give me a name? Can you give me some evidence? And George Stephanopoulos gave the name of a human rights activist, Anna Politkovskaya, if I'm saying it right. And Trump says, well, that'd be terrible. He says, I've never seen any information or any proof that he killed reporters. So, you're naming a name, but where's the evidence? Well, if you look at the evidence of this case of this human rights activist, there is no evidence. There were several investigations in Russia that came up with no evidence that Russian government had anything to do with it. Of course, Western critics are going to say, well, I don't trust Russian hearings, but that doesn't turn non-evidence into evidence. They still don't have any evidence. And if you look at the wiki page that talks about this investigation of Anna Politkovskaya, they only have one little thing they can throw out there that points to possible Russian government involvement, and that is that the Russian government was wiretapping her emails. And so I said, well, does that mean that everybody in the United States that has an email account that was murdered by the NSA and the U.S. government because they tapped their emails? Everybody's emails are tapped. It's just pitiful. I mean, the quote unquote evidence is pitiful. So that's another one that needs to come out. We already mentioned Lenfanico. Do I got any others here? Well, let's leave it at that. I want to let's switch conversation here for a little bit, and let's go down memory lane because I really like your background in the past that as a prologue to this, these current events. Question one would be John Birch Society. I've heard thoughts here and there that the John Birch Society was infiltrated, that they were controlled opposition, and that kind of stuff. For someone who's so close to that movement, tell me what you think about that movement and to what degree it's fully legitimate and to what degree it might have been compromised.
Well, I think it's fair to say that it was the only organized movement that was bringing to people's attention the drive for world government, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Federal Reserve. It was publishing all those books, while also upholding the Constitution as it continues to do. And so there's many great things I can say about it, and it continues to stand for those things. Now, I think that where they've missed, they did not call 9/11. Did not really investigate it very much. They said that our intelligence failed, but they didn't look at it as a inside job or a Zionist job. And I think they missed a great opportunity because they've been talking about conspiracy for years. When 9/11 happened, they did not get on board with that while the entire truther movement was being birthed.
And why do you think that is? Do you think that's because they were infiltrated, or do you think they were just old, tired dogs who just didn't have the fight in them anymore? Or why do you think that happened?
Well, I will say this much, that, a blind spot for me being involved with them for a long time was the threat of Zionism, and I never understood just how lethal Zionism is. And, they never discussed the state of Israel or Zionism in the JBS, John Birch Society. But I have to say, in fairness to them, one reason for that was that, if you go back to the 1964 Republican Convention, when Barry Goldwater was nominated, Nelson Rockefeller gave a speech denouncing extremists, and he said, I haven't got the exact quote here in front of me, but he said he denounced the Ku Klux Klan, the Nazis, and the John Birch Society. And that speech kind of put the John Birch Society in the racist category, even though it was completely non-racist. And they were accused of being Nazis, okay? And so they're very sensitive from the early days of defending that, and they didn't want to appear to be anti-Semitic or associated with Nazism or the Ku Klux Klan. Having said that, they are overly blind, I believe, on the issue of Zionism. It's something that it took me a while to wake up to. And by the way, I am half Jewish. Perloff is, an Americanization of Perlovsky. The Perlovskys were Russian Jews who came over here in 1904 during one of the pogroms. But it's very clear to me that the Rothschild establishment, and just you look at the oligarchs that Putin kicked out, they were mostly Jewish, and they'd taken over half the wealth of Russia and tied back to the Rothschilds. One of them was arrested. All his assets went to Jacob Rothschild. The Rothschilds formed Israel. Israel is not this takes us the whole area of Zionism, but Israel is not a rebirthing of biblical Israel by God. It is a political maneuver by the Rothschilds. I mean, the Balfour Declaration, by which Britain during World War I promised a Jewish homeland in Palestine to the Zionist Federation in return for bringing America into the First World War on Britain's side, that was issued to Lord Walter Rothschild. And it was the banker James de Rothschild who bought up so much land in Palestine for the Zionists that he was put on Israel's 500 shekel note.
All right, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop you there because we. Okay. Not that I'm afraid of the subject, but we've got a whole podcast.
I diverted for your question about the John Birch Society, but I'm just saying this was
that's
spot for me, and I was behind the curve on it.
Well, but that also explains why they would have sort of not has been as salty and effective here in the last couple of decades as they were in the past. Now, another question I've got for you. In your article, most recent article here, you include a video clip of Larry McDonald. Yeah, Larry McDonald.
Lawrence McDonald, yep.
Who was chairman, head of the John Birch Society for a time. He was also a congressman in Georgia.
Correct.
And I live down here, by the way, and when I drive to Atlanta, there's the Larry McDonald Highway on the interstate. But he, in that clip, I'm not. I haven't watched that actual clip. I think I probably have several times, but I didn't watch it in your article. But McDonald would talk a lot about the kind of things Birchers would talk about, which is that we've got a weapons race going on both sides of the Atlantic, but it's really banksters that fund both sides, and we need to get beyond just the what's in front of our face and the propaganda, and realize that the real evil is these bankers that are making money off all the weaponry. Well, what is it, 6-7 months, I think you say in the article, after that particular interview, which was on one of the major networks, he died in the Korea flight over Alaska 007, is that what it's called?
007, yeah.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to ask you about that. What do you personally think about that? Do you think that that crash had anything to do with McDonald?
We certainly thought so at the time. I mean, at that time, the John Birch Society was considered the world's most organized anti-communist group. And he was the new head of it. And he was handsome. He was articulate. By the way, in addition to being a congressman, he was also a surgeon. Very intelligent man. If you watch that clip, he's being attacked by Tom Braden, CFR, CIA, who's ridiculing the idea of conspiracy, and he very articulately defends it He talked about Carol Quigley's book. This is 1983. This is before the internet. I mean, this is early alternative media. But as the young, vibrant head of the John Birch Society, replacing Robert Welch, who founded it in 1958, he'd just taken over after Welch had run it for 25 years. We thought it was a pretty strange coincidence that he happened to be on a flight that was shot down by the Soviets. And it certainly did nothing to soften our view of the Soviet Union at that time. There's been different theories on that. You know, the original news reports were that the plane was not shot down, but that it landed on one of those Soviet islands. And then the story changed, and they said it was lost at sea. There was people who believed that, in fact, it did land, and that the passengers were hauled off for questioning or sent to gulags and never to be heard from again. Some people think the original story, you know, about being shot down and decimated was true, and that he died at that time. I don't know what the story is, but that is still one of the history's mysteries, you might say, that is unresolved. It's not something I have tried to vet in recent years, but something that still certainly weighs on our mind from that Cold War era.
Yeah, I've got a personal friend who whose relatives were in that flight, and he's spent, you know, a couple decades now trying to get to the bottom of it. You know, it's got his website and that sort of thing, and it's not easy. All right, similar question. There's various theories out there, but what would be your theory, as best as you might know, on why the Soviet Union did collapse?
You know, there was always this belief, included with the John Birch Society, that ultimately the Soviet Union had been was controlled by the West. And, you know, first of all, you could look at the Bolshevik Revolution. No question that the Rothschilds financed that. We know all about Trotsky being sent with $20 million in gold by Kuhn Loeb and company, Jacob Schiff, Paul Warburg, who was the founder of the Federal Reserve, sent him there. Woodrow Wilson even intervened to make sure he got through when the Canadians detained him. At the same time, Paul Warburg's brother Max made sure that Lenin got into Russia with gold on a what they called a sealed train. And we know that Freemasonry was involved in the downfall of the Tsar. And if you read a wonderful book by Yuri Lina, Under the Sign of the Scorpion, you know, he did tremendous research into the Soviet archives after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He found that the orders to kill the Tsar didn't originate with Lenin. It came from New York. It came from the Jewish Zionist bankers. They wanted to wipe it out. You know, Bolshevism and Talmudism go hand in hand. And so the bankers in the West had everything to do with the creation of the Soviet Union and in propping it up. If you look at World War II, Stalin would not have withstood the onslaught of Operation Barbarossa without all the countless millions of dollars of Lend-Lease aid that was flowing in, all the tanks and torpedo boats and railway cars and machine guns that were coming in from the West. And we favored the Soviet Union to a large extent over our own troops. MacArthur would have told you that. His men couldn't get supplies while aircraft were being sent to the Soviet Union. And by the way, read Major Jordan's diaries. He was a Lend-Lease expediter. We even sent them the plans and lab equipment and materials for the making of the first atomic bomb. And you go back through the Cold War years, David Rockefeller's plane had landing rights in Moscow, his private plane, during the height of the Cold War. And Chase Manhattan Bank had its headquarters at 1 Karl Marx Square. I mean, they were giving the Soviets loans at 0% interest, and they were helping to build factories. And this is true of Cyrus Eaton and Armand Hammer and all these other wealthy bankers in the West who were propping up the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It seems like it was, to a certain extent, a phony war. It seems to me also that it's no coincidence that the start of the Cold War began with the start of the State of Israel. You know, the first real movie about the threat of communism was called The Iron Curtain, starring Dana Andrews, and that came out in 1948. 1948 is also the year that Israel was founded. And, you know, Israel is a proxy state of the Rothschilds. If you read David Ben-Gurion's comments from Look magazine in 1962, he said that the seat of world government is going to be Jerusalem. And they've been saying that for a long time. This is why they want that. This is what was predicted in the book of Thessalonians in the Bible, was that from the rebuilt temple, the man of lawlessness would reign. This is where the Antichrist is going to reign. And that is what Zionism is really about. It's not about the rebirth in the biblical Israel. But central to their plan has not just been world government, because, the Antichrist, as I've mentioned before, probably on your show before, the Bible predicts in Revelation that there's this dark figure called the Antichrist.
I want to stop you here for a little bit because we've gotten a little off the reservation. But okay. I think you're going to get there. But I'm asking you, why did the Soviet Union collapse? And I guess you're going to tell me that whatever agenda they had for the Soviet Union must have changed.
I think that its season had completed, and the time had come to create greater Israel. And so the Soviet Union had to disappear as a threat. And that's why I was talking about that coinciding of Gorbachev and Glasnost with the first attack on Libya and the shifting of the focus of the military industrial establishment, which is controlled by the deep state, from communism. Once that threat goes away, all of a sudden we've got this Muslim terrorist threat. And all the shifting of our military went onto that, culminating, of course, after 9/11 with all these wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, always under a false pretext. And we know that these wars were planned in 2001 because we've got that video clip of General Wesley Clark, former commander of NATO, saying that he was in the Pentagon after 9/11, and they said we're going to take out 7 nations in 5 years, and that included Libya and Syria and Iraq. So they needed pretext, but it was already planned. We know that it was already planned.
We both quote that story in the articles we wrote this week. Right. Well, let me ask you this. Then, if a decision was made at a higher level, as you think, to collapse the Soviet Union, how did they do that? And why did, if you think the motive was for greater Israel, in other words, switch the villain to, I guess you're saying switch the villain to Arab Muslims so that we can start bombing Arab nations, which we did, to prepare for a greater Israel. If that's what you think the motive is, why does the Soviet Union have to go away?
You need, if you're going to concentrate all of your military force and all of your income and all that expense and development of weapons on the Middle East and the Muslims, you can't have it focused on this great threat of the Soviet Union, which had been would have been troubling us for all those decades.
Okay, so there is, at some point, there is finite resources, and so they readdress the resources to do that. Perhaps, maybe as to go along with your little theory here, that they thought that opening up Russia to democracy, quote unquote, was going to work really well long term. In fact, it really did work very, very well for about 10 years in terms of what they were hoping to accomplish, but perhaps it backfired on them.
I'm sorry, backfired on whom? You're talking about the West,
the global bankers, the ones who are the deep state who are calling the shots here. They thought collapsing the Soviet Union and bringing in a more democratic Russia was going to actually serve their purposes for the New World Order. But 10 years later, all of a sudden, Russia refines itself in terms of its Christian roots, and a bunch of things start to happen. So it really got away from them.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what happened with the rebirthing of Christianity, which I think they thought they had crushed. The Bolsheviks under Lenin and into Stalin, they destroyed 60,000 churches and murdered 300,000 priests. And I think they believed they could destroy Christianity and destroy the Orthodox Church there. But it didn't work out that way. The church continued to live underground. And with the removal of communism and then the removal of the oligarchs who were looting Russia by Putin, all of a sudden you had this reemergence of Russia as a power and as a Christian nation, and experiencing Christianity on a level that's, I think, right now probably unparalleled in the world.
Well, that's interesting. I'm gonna kind of wind us down here because we could go on and a lot of interesting things. But so we started this podcast. Basically, we both written an article this week, just in review. Yours is at jamesperloff.com. The unthinkable has finally happened. Russia and America have traded places. And of course, in terms of trading places, you're talking about being a moral light to the world. And my article at globalstoryline.com is Trump's Secretary of State pick received Russia's Order of Friendship Award. In a multipolar world, is it bad to be a friend of Vlad? So that's the articles that we've written, and basically just talking about the world is changing. Very interesting things are happening. Tectonic shifts. I think I told you privately on the phone a couple days ago that I think the biggest story of the century, the past 100 years, is what's happened in Russia. From the fall of the Tsar, the Bolshevik Revolution, the horribly murderous atheism for several decades, that collapsing, Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, re-emerging in Russia, and that's got to be the story of the century, in my opinion. And now we're seeing similar, very huge shifts happening in America with a very strange leader of it right now, Donald Trump, if you can call him a leader. But that's happening too with the power of many of the gatekeepers in the major media. Their power and influence is dwindling. A lot of things are changing. A lot of truth is getting out there. A lot of interesting things are happening.
Yes, it's been there's been major shifts. You know, the Brexit vote in England was, I believe, a measure of the rise of populism and public awareness. It was a breaking away from that New World Order. You know, the EU is a regional microcosm of world government. That's what it was designed to be, just as NAFTA was supposed to be turned into the North American Union. And Trump's election, and I still have reservations and watch him very guardedly, especially he's surrounded by a number of very strong Zionists, and I'm concerned about the possibility of a false flag early on his watch, again, Israeli originated, but there's no denying the fact that Donald Trump was elected as a result of the rise of populism and alternative media in America, basically knocking the sales out of the mainstream media and the Bush-Clinton hegemony and their hold on American politics.
Amen. Okay, well, I'm going to stop us there and say good discussion. And it was fun that we both wrote articles that were similar this week. Next week will be interesting with the confirmation hearings of Secretary of State elect, Secretary of State proposed Rex Tillerson, Chairman of Exxon, and much of the stuff that we've talked about in this podcast, I think, is going to be talked about by the senators themselves and the rest of the major and alternative media on these issues of what's it mean to be a friend of Vlad? Is that good or bad? And so it'll be fun to listen to and watch that. So anyway, have a great holiday, not a holiday, have a great winter session in that many feet of snow in New England or whatever you got up there. And I'll see if I can.
Never know.
I'll see if I can navigate the half inch we have here. I'm a little scared about it.
By the way, I'm waiting to see if RT will now hire us as commentators. They might say, if you guys keep butchering those Russian names, we're just not going to be able to have you on.
Well, I'd like to be an RT, but I don't know when that big salary comes. I don't know. We might become sort of toothless like the Birch Society. So maybe where we are is a good place.
Well, let's keep using our own God-guided motives to tell people the truth and keep learning. I'm still in a learning process, but I'm very thankful to be at this place where I'm not, in the matrix and, believing what I'm seeing on mainstream media, and very glad to be part of the fight for truth. And to me, it was a great delight to learn, as I expressed in this last article, that Russia is not what the mainstream media is saying it is. And that gives me some hope that if a world leader can emerge who's not part of that Rothschild-dominated New World Order, maybe there's hope for the rest of the world, too.
I don't know if you saw a tweet that I made or a Facebook post, but... I
unfollowed you. I'm just joking. I
looked at Rex Tillerson's Wikipedia page, and in it they talk about how he stood up to the Rockefellers.
Well, Exxon is a descendant of Standard Oil, which is a Rockefeller enterprise.
Right.
So, my guard went up when I heard that it was from Exxon.
No, there was a big shakeup where the Rockefeller family tried to. I don't know the exact tactics and politics of it, but basically they took a position within Exxon that was going to separate the CEO having not so much control over the company or that sort of thing. And anyway, Rex Tillerson opposed what the Rockefeller family was wanting to see happen at Exxon.
I didn't know that.
And he won. He opposed the Rockefeller family. They didn't get what they wanted. He got what he wanted. And it was a major development at Exxon. So that might give you a little bit of encouragement to know that he is not a Rockefeller lapdog.
Okay, well, I did hear a few months ago that the Rockefellers are in the process of disinvesting from oil, which was really strange to hear from the Rockefeller family. So maybe it had something to do with that, but I need to look into that Tillerson-Rockefeller conflict. That's the first I heard of it. You're mentioning it right now.
I think it'd be a great thing to do extensive work on, because all we have right now, all I could find was a paragraph in Wiki. So that's great. Well, listen, I'm going to let you go. Always enjoy talking to you, and glad you're doing your work. And have a great day.
Okay, thanks so much, Dean.